And welcome to the Exhorter podcast, where we aim to stir up love and good works through bite-sized biblical discussion. Thank you for coming back to us. We had a little break there for a little bit, and we're going to have a few more episodes here before we end the season and kind of start back up in January. Kyle, I think you're going to lead us off with our topic this morning, today, whenever you're hearing this.
Yes, thanks for tuning in and watching
today, yes.
All right, well, today's topic is actually maybe not so much bite-sized, if you will, but and here we go. I'm already starting off making the point that I want to make throughout this episode. Our topic today is gluttony, and right away you can tell it's a topic that is easy to be dismissive about because we're already telling jokes. It's easy to let this become something that we don't take too seriously. But the Bible does have quite a bit to say about gluttony. I think it's one of those sins that we might characterize as a forgotten sin. Now, I'm coming into this without really having prepared you guys or having given you the heads up. I want to know, just without thinking through it, when I say gluttony, how do you define that? What does that mean to you?
Are you bringing this up right after Thanksgiving for a reason?
Seriously.
I waited till after Thanksgiving. I didn't want to ruin Thanksgiving for anybody. Still time to ruin Christmas, though.
Paul.
Well, and I don't want this to be too...
Hey, and a little disclaimer here. I mean, I'll probably take out a lot of the in here, but we're all sick. We're all just getting over mixing.
So, Kyle, what I think of is, the Bible says it's good and fitting for one to eat and drink, enjoy the good of his labor in which he toils under the sun. So we're not talking about enjoying the fruits of our labor and eating and those kind of things. What we're talking about is something that goes beyond that, where your eating becomes almost like an idol, if you will, as a going beyond that. It's not sustaining your needs. It's not enjoying the fruits of your labor, but now it's gone beyond that.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought up that text because that is one of my favorite verses in the Old Testament, is the idea that under the sun, as far as life here on this earth, like Thanksgiving is like the ideal, because that's what the preacher says in Ecclesiastes. Under the sun, life really doesn't get much better than a good meal, enjoying good food at a table with your family and friends and enjoying their company. So if you're someone that really likes to eat, if you're someone that really enjoys food, maybe you're one of those chefs and you're always experimenting and trying to come up with these new creations, I don't want to spoil that for you. You can enjoy food. That's one of those things God meant to give us to enjoy in this life.
So it's okay to be a foodie?
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that to enjoy? Because I would also think about it very much like idolatry or addiction in my mind. It's like why you fast. It's why people fast, is to take the focus off of one thing and put it on something else. And I think someone who, is a glutton just has the wrong perspective and wrong priorities in life and wrong focus.
Yeah. Well, the example that I think of in Scripture is in Numbers chapter 11, and it kind of shows the idea here. And Paul, I'm glad you also related it to idolatry, because idolatry is more than just the carved image. It's what the whole concept represents, a turning away from God, a dismissal of God's authority in your life. That's the real offense with idolatry. It takes the shape of a little wooden carved image that they would bow down to or make sacrifices to, but behind the surface, there's a deeper concern and offense. And so it is with gluttony too. It's the idea that it's not just about being overweight or eating too much. It's when you do it to an excess and to where it starts showing a lack of trust and faith in God. So in Numbers chapter 11, we see the people of God complain. They're in the wilderness. They complain about lacking food. They want meat. They've been provided for. God gave them manna, but they want meat. And Moses, here's where I can relate to him as a father of a 7 and a 3-year-old. He just, God, I can't handle all this complaining and grumbling. I didn't give birth to these, millions of people here. Why do you expect me to take care of them like this? So God goes ahead and grants them quail. And it says in Numbers 11 and verse 31 that he sent a wind and it brought quail from the sea and left them fluttering near the camps about a day's journey on this side and about a day's journey on the other side, all around the camp. And it says that the people, they stayed up all that day, all night, and all the next day and gathered the quail, saying even the one who gathered the least still had a huge excess of quail, and they spread them out for themselves all around the camp. But while the meat was still between their teeth, before it was chewed, the wrath of the Lord was aroused against the people, and the Lord struck the people with a very great plague. So he called the name of that place Kibroth Hattaavah, because they buried people who had yielded to craving. And so the name of that place is literally graves of craving. And so the problem here is not that they were eating too much. The problem really was that they weren't trusting in God. God gave them something good. And as you mentioned that scripture from Ecclesiastes, food is meant to be a blessing to be enjoyed. They took a blessing from God and they became selfish and greedy. And that's how most dictionaries will define it, like Merriam-Webster's habitual greed or excess in eating, greedy or excessive indulgence. They looked at this as, this is never going to happen again, and we need to keep it all for ourselves. And they were like ravenous animals eating these birds. And before it was even out of their, what was the phrase?
Between their teeth.
Well, it was still between their teeth. You can just picture kind of a disgusting scene where they're stuffing their faces and eating these quail without even stopping to chew their food. And that's why God was so upset, because it showed a lack of faith in him, as if he wouldn't bring more quail some other time, or as if they didn't believe that he could provide for them.
Also didn't look like they thanked the Lord.
Yeah, they just jumped right into gathering it up and started hoarding it, piling it up, gathering as much as they could.
You know, Kyle, I want to go off what you just said about providing. You know, the passage we read in Ecclesiastes was, you know, eating and drinking, enjoying the fruit of your labor. But when I look at passages about gluttony, the book of Titus, Cretans were described as lazy gluttons. It's just interesting that they're described as lazy gluttons. What does laziness have to do with being a glutton? In the book of Proverbs, it talks about gluttony leading to poverty and drowsiness in Proverbs 22 and verse 21. And in Deuteronomy chapter 21 and verse 20, it says, "And they shall say to the elders of a city, this our son is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey our voice. He is a glutton and drunkard." And in this case, the son is not working at all. You've got passages where eating and being merry is okay. You know, the prodigal son. You know, the prodigal son goes away and is not doing what he should and is not working. What happens? He's hungry. He doesn't have enough food. He's eating things he never thought he would eat. What happens when, at the end, when he comes home to the prodigal son? The fatted calf is killed. Eat and be merry. But is it linked in any way to working and doing what you should be doing?
I think I can answer. And if you couldn't tell, I approach this topic from a perspective of experience. This is something, like I said from the very beginning, the first thing I said about this topic was a joke, because that's what we usually turn this topic into. But it's been a real struggle in my life. And it's just something I think a lot more of us need to take more seriously. So speaking from my extensive experience with struggling with this topic, I think I can explain exactly the connection with gluttony and laziness. You ever tried to be productive after eating an entire Marie Callender's pie? You ever tried to have a productive day, or maybe you eat 5 or 6 Arby's roast beef sandwiches?
First, you got to get us to agree that we've all sat down there with a pie and eaten the whole pie, Kyle.
In high school, I set an IHOP record at the local IHOP in Beaverton, Oregon. I had 20 pancakes. I got the meal for free if you beat the house record. So I had 18, and then I came back a couple days later and ate 20. Now, you eat 20 pancakes, you're not going to be a super productive person. You're not going to be able to keep your eyes open after that. I think that's the connection with laziness, is that you're feeding your body and to an excess, and it makes you a less productive person. It makes you, and basically you're taking the whole purpose of your being and turning it into satisfying the desires of your flesh. Now, oftentimes we talk about the desires of the flesh or lusts of the flesh. It's with a more sexual connotation, but I think this is a related idea, that it's just another appetite. It's the appetite of your body. And when you eat to an excess, you're just satisfying a bodily appetite, I think, at the neglect of your spiritual needs. And that's the real problem.
I don't think I've ever really thought about it as slowing one's potential, or, you know, not being able to be zealous and free and excited and energetic to do all the other things God has put us here to do, because we have satiated ourselves. But I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I struggled with this mightily in when I lived in Texas. I'm glad I only lived there for 1 year. I loved all the people there, but I don't think I would have survived living there with all the ready amount of brisket that was there. But no, that's exactly my thoughts. I might be wrong about this, but that's my experience. You know, you stuff your face with brisket, you get the meat sweats, and all you want to do is take a nap. And I lacked so much energy during that point in my life. And it just makes me a less productive person overall. So I see how they go hand in hand. And the other connection you made, Paul, with some of the scriptures you brought up is with drunkenness. That's even what they tried to say to Jesus. Okay, so here's where I want to make a side point. Gluttony should not be equated strictly with being overweight. Okay, they're often hand in hand. Overweight is often a symptom or evidence of gluttony, but not always. Even me growing up, I was always bigger than my brother Ryan, my older brother Ryan. Now, at Clovis, a couple weeks ago, most of you got to see my brother preach, and you saw that he is like 1/3 my size, even though he's almost as tall as me. Just growing up, we had different metabolisms. I was always bigger. Now, I'm not trying to say that I'm only as big as I am because I have a different metabolism. I've overeaten. I admit that. But also, I'm just a bigger person. If I lost all the weight I possibly could, I'm never going to be as small and thin as my brother Ryan. I'm just built bigger. So let's not falsely equate gluttony with being overweight, because look, in Matthew chapter 11 and verse 19, one of the accusations falsely that they leveled against Jesus was he's a glutton and a drunkard. We've all seen the pictures. We know Jesus was pretty ripped and thin.
He's a cool 180. I don't understand how.
Well, like Jim Gaffigan says, I don't know how he stayed so thin. He could multiply bread. He must have had some carbs. But my point is, it isn't always just an overweight thing. And Jesus wasn't a glutton or a drunkard, but that's the accusation they made. So the other connection is with drunkenness. And I think I can kind of explain that too. I think eating can become a form of self-medicating the way alcoholism or drug abuse can. Now, a lot of people don't make this connection because the consequences of overeating are not quite as drastic as overdosing on drugs or drinking to the point of drunkenness. The margin of error is a little more forgiving when you overeat, right? Because you don't really hear about people stuffing their face and then blacking out and crashing their car. So the consequences are not quite as harsh, but I think the principle is the same. That a lot of times people drink to take the edge off a hard day. They drink when they want to forget, or they kind of self-diagnose with overdoing it with prescription drugs or even other kinds of drugs. And I think it's the same concept, just on a maybe different scale.
It kind of sounds, Kyle, like a drunkard is never quite satisfied. You know, Proverbs 23:35, the drunkard is always anxious to seek another drink. If we're focusing on food this way, we're never quite satisfied.
Half the time I eat, I'm not even hungry when I eat. In fact, I'm stuffed and I'm just eating more because I want that. It's cheating. You have some sort of hurt or pain or stress, and you look for the simplest and easiest way to make that go away. And whether it's drugs or alcohol or food, or for some people it's sex, things like that, it makes the pain go away, but superficially and temporarily.
It reminds me of the Apostle Peter in 2 Peter 2:19 said, by whom a person is overcome, by him also he's brought into bondage. You could talk about that with drunkenness. You could talk about that with anything that we have to return to again and again. Paul said, all things are lawful for me, but I will not be brought under the power of any. And anything like that, whether it be drunkenness, whether it be gluttony, whether it be anything that we must go to excess, might be in that category, do you think?
I certainly think so. And this is where it's been, in my life, the most apparent as a problem, when it becomes a substitute for seeking God. Eating has become a substitute for a deeper prayer life or a stronger connection or even a deeper faith and trust in God. Because again, oftentimes gluttony is really just at its core a lack of faith in God. Its faith is based upon what you can't see, and lacking faith is when you live by what you can see. I have food around me and that makes me feel better. I'm not trusting God in the unseen. I'm trusting in what's right here, right now. So it is a lack of faith. And that's where it's been a problem for me. It's really hindered my prayer life at times in my life. And I think most people are aware of this, but 3 years ago, my brother-in-law passed away in a very difficult and just frustrating kind of way. And my wife, my mother and father-in-law, they've been struggling, and I've been in a house with grieving people for a long time, and myself hurting and grieving and trying to cope with this. And I've noticed that there are times where I turn to food to try and satisfy that grief, to try and take the edge off that grief and pain, rather than seeking out a deeper connection to God, rather than being more devoted to prayer and seeking Him for the help. And that's where it's really been the biggest problem. And I think it's easy to be dismissive of this topic, but it's a very subtle attack from Satan, because it just doesn't seem like it's that evil of a thing, because everyone enjoys food, but it's a very subtle attack from Satan. And it is an effective tool at getting him to take your eyes off God.
Gluttony isn't always measured by the eye test. If you're overweight, you must be a glutton. It's absolutely not what we're saying. And you cannot just look at someone and understand what they're thinking and how they've gotten to the weight they are, or the life that they live. And I don't think that's key. I think that there's lots of different reasons how people come to being overweight. Me is I would work late at night and get so little sleep, and then use I use a lot of caffeine to stay awake, and sugar and caffeine and some of those, but it wasn't necessarily feeding that. It was probably more gluttony of work, or it was probably more of a too much focused on something else that wasn't healthy.
Well, you probably were working because you had some pain, and work was a way to avoid.
Yeah, I need to pay bills.
It was a distraction.
Bills are painful, but it's a distraction, and I think that's the thing we definitely want to. If you looked at the title of this one and just thought, oh, this is going to be an attack towards me, and I fit in that boat, and I just want to make sure that that's not what we got from this topic.
Well, and
today.
And understand it is friendly fire, because most of this episode today came from someone who is easily over 300 pounds.
There you go.
Not for long, though.
Not for
New
long.
Year's resolutions,
I'm
man.
going to get a Bowflex.
I'm going to commit.
Okay, well, I'll go back to the gym, man. Let's go. Hit it back up. I know you're going to tell me, come January 1st. Let's do it.
January 5th.
January 5th. Okay.
After my birthday.
After your birthday.
And if we just want to talk about solutions, maybe this is a struggle you have as well. It doesn't necessarily mean you're overweight, but maybe you struggle with anything else. Again, I'll make the parallel. I think alcoholism and drug abuse are more nuanced and deeper topics that's kind of our problem here on this show. We like to talk about, we'll get to that in a future episode.
You got to start writing those down every time we say that, huh?
Yeah. I don't want to give people promises we don't follow up on, but alcoholism and drug abuse are certainly much more challenging topics in a lot of ways, but there is a parallel here. We need to be seeking God. And if we want to talk solutions, Colossians chapter 3 is one of those scriptures my mind goes to when I think about the underlying problem with gluttony. Is I'm just seeking comfort, but I'm not seeking it from a source that will satisfy, at least long term. And it just has these complicating results. It tends to manifest in other ways too. I'm overweight. I don't like the way I look. That leads to a lack of self-confidence. That leads to feelings of depression, or feelings of it just creates other problems too. So it's kind of a self-defeating cycle. But as far as solutions go, it says in Colossians chapter 3, beginning in verse 1, that if then you were raised with Christ, seek those things which are above, where Christ is, sitting at the right hand of God. Set your mind on things above, not on things on the earth. For you died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is our life, appears, then you also will appear with him in glory.
You correlated gluttony to lack of faith. It's kind of like I'm missing a step in between there a little bit, but I think it's self-discipline. And I think that's one of those things that, if you talk about whatever vices people have to satiate their emotional needs rather than God and rather than prayer, I think that makes sense. I think self-discipline is it's such a difficult thing to deal with. But in Hebrews 12:11, it says, for a moment, all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant, but later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. Which I love that it actually says fruit in there.
Well, speaking of fruit, self-control is a
fruit of the Spirit.
Fruit of the Spirit.
Yeah, there you go. I just think self-discipline and focusing there is probably just a really good way to mitigate ever being unequally yoked in this life.
Yeah. And I need to make a differentiation here between being overweight versus being gluttonous, because I am both. And I need to fix the gluttony problem And yes, I do want to lose weight. I do want to feel good about the way I look. I want to be healthy so I can have energy and be around for my kids and live long enough to help raise them and see them grown up and move out of the house. I want all those things. But that isn't, I don't want to conflate that with the gluttony problem, because I can lose weight and still be gluttonous. If I'm greedily seeking after worldly things for comfort, it might not be food. I might just shift my gluttony to something else. So it's kind of two different problems that overlap and are related. But I'm really trying to focus on walking not by sight, but walking by faith. And that's the key to overcoming gluttony. I think the other key is really just a much more focused and devoted prayer life. You know what I wish? I wish I was the kind of person. There's another form of gluttony. It's someone that when they're stressed or anxious, they go work out. I wish my brain was wired that way, because I'd be in really good
you
shape.
could have a problem where you're all about the gym, and that takes your focus away from other things.
And that becomes an obsession. It's a different form of gluttony, but it's the same concept. So at the end of the day, we talk about this connection with gluttony to laziness, gluttony to drunkenness. It's funny how many things in the Bible often are to help you understand it, you get a connection to. Fasting is one of those things too. We want to talk about the antithesis of gluttony. It's fasting.
So to bring it to a practical point, Kyle, I think, what does it really mean? And I think what you're saying is it's what are you devoted to? I was looking at the word glutton in the Bible. Titus 1:12 talks about Cretans being gluttons, and the word literally means belly. But it goes further than that. It's one who loves his belly. That's what it means. So Paul said to the Philippians, for many walk, of whom I've told you often, and now tell you even weeping, that they are the enemies of the cross of Christ, those whose end is destruction, whose God is their belly, and whose glory is in their shame, who set their minds on earthly things. To make one's belly his God, meaning that drives you, that's what we're talking about here, is that drives everything that you do. And you do see things in the Bible where people have made choices based on something that is temporary and satisfies us for a moment. We think about Esau. He was described as a profane person. Why? Because for one morsel of food, he sold his birthright. That's the reason. He shifted his focus from the eternal to a temporary satisfaction from food. And that's really the message, Kyle, I think you're trying to convey.
Yeah,
right?
When you stop walking by faith and start walking by sight, you find the things that you can see, that you can touch, that you can eat in this world, things that you can consume, and you turn to that rather than trusting in God. And final thought I have is just making this connection with prayer and fasting, because we talk about fasting, and you can talk about hours for all these health reasons that might be good. But I think in the Bible, the connection between prayer and fasting is what has always struck me. And I don't know, I might have a bad habit of oversimplifying things, but when I see the connection between prayer and fasting, I think it's a really simple idea. The reason people in the New Testament, and it's a New Testament thing, we see that when they appointed elders in Acts chapter 14 in every church, they did it with prayer and fasting. And you see Jesus fasting and praying at the same time. And so you have examples of this. And Paul writes to the Corinthians about his own, sometimes it was fasting because he was in places where he didn't have food, but he also talks about prayer and fasting. 1 Corinthians 7, the husband and wife, they can be devoted to a time of prayer and fasting. And so we see it in the New Testament. I think the idea is very simple. When you're so devoted to prayer, you just keep praying to the point where I'm not even going to stop to eat food. I'm going to ignore my bodily appetites because I'm focused on feeding my soul right now, and that's more important. So fasting it can be something you do for health reasons, and that's all fine. But fasting isn't something where you like those people that whip their back or cut themselves so the blood pours out and wear the scratchy hair shirts or whatever it is that people used to do. So the bigger point is it's not so much that you're trying to punish your body by starvation. The idea is that's why it's almost always connected with prayer, because I'm focused on feeding my soul. I'm not even going to stop. Like King David, when Bathsheba became pregnant and the child was ill, he didn't even stop to eat. He just kept praying and making his petition to the Lord. That was what was most important to him at the time, seeking God. and seeking God's favor in that moment. He didn't even stop to take care of himself or eat because he was putting his emphasis on the spiritual. I know that was a really bad situation involving his own sin, but still, it's a good example of this concept. So if you've struggled with this, if it's been something that maybe you don't realize you've struggled because it's such an easy topic to dismiss, I think a deeper focus on God, as Colossians 3 reminds us, keep your eyes on Christ, live for faith. There's always going to be a certain amount of comfort we get from food, from watching entertainment, from exercise, if you're one of those people. There's always going to be a certain amount of comfort we get from that. But let's not make that what we're about. Let's not make that the thing we seek. It's not going to satisfy you like a deeper and more meaningful prayer life will.
Well, Kyle, thank you for this topic, and also one that you were, transparent about kind of how you felt about it and struggling for it. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Well, we didn't want to sugarcoat it because I'd probably eat it.
And with an ending like that, we want to thank you, the listener, for joining. We try to bring topics of interest to you. If you have suggestions of topics that are relevant, let us know. Send us a message or just come talk to one of us. Share this on your Facebook page or others so that others can find out. And thanks again for listening. We'll see you next episode.
Don't you hate it the day after Thanksgiving? You're eating leftovers, you're having turkey and pumpkin pie for like the 4th time in 2 days, and then you look in the mirror and all you see is Jabba the Hutt. Maybe one more slice.
Maybe one more slice of pie. I'm just offended right now that you and I are fasting with coffee, and Paul's over here eating an energy bar. Is that like a breakfast cereal bar? Cliff bar. Oh, okay. So he's eating, but now he's like mocking us with health food.
Yeah, I call that sad food.
That's sad food.
Is that health food?
Cliff bars? And it's probably not really healthy for you.
It's an energy bar.
Yeah, it gives you energy. It's okay.
So don't eat too much at Christmas.
Yeah, you sandwiched it right between two really wonderful holidays here.
Why'd you talk about sandwiches? I'm hungry.
Puns.
It's funny. You don't even have to really even like the food when you're just looking for comfort. Like, there's two kinds of people in this world. There are those that think Jack in the Box tacos are disgusting. And then there are those people that think they're disgusting but eat them anyway.
So
I am the
latter.
Yes. Give me that warm pocket of cat food with some lettuce and American cheese on it. Disgusting, but also delicious.